All right, good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so excited to have our friend and hero, Sarah Schulman, back in the space of Charis. Yes, Sarah is truly somebody who we consistently look up to. Even those of us who are age peers with Sarah have looked up to Sarah for many decades now, and it is rare to have an author who walks the walk and talks the talk so beautifully and so presciently as Sarah has done for so many decades. We're very honored to have Dr. Moon Charania with us tonight. Moon is an incredible activist and author. She's also an important professor at Spelman College. She's a feminist scholar whose research explores the psychosocial dimensions of the lives of women of color. She investigates social, political, and intimate issues in relation to gender and sexuality, violence and care, racism, and the diasporic experience. She's an associate professor of international studies at Spelman College and the 2024-25 Anschutz Distinguished Fellow in American Studies at Princeton University. She's the author of 2 books, both of which Charis has had the honor of helping celebrate: Archive of Tongues, An Intimate History of Brownness, and Will the Real Pakistani Women Please Stand Up? Empire, Visual Culture, and the Brown Female Body. We're really excited that Moon is here to help have this conversation because Moon is a deeply intersectional thinker, and this book that we're celebrating tonight is a deeply intersectional book. So I know it's going to be a beautiful conversation. But first, just in case you've somehow stumbled in and don't know who Sarah Schulman is, Sarah Schulman is a novelist, playwright, screenwriter, nonfiction writer, and AIDS historian. Her books include Gentrification of the Mind, Conflict is Not Abuse, and Let the Record Show, A Political History of ACT UP, New York, 1987 to 1993, as well as the novels The Cosmopolitans and Maggie Terry, among many others. Her honors include a Fulbright in Judaic Studies, a Guggenheim in Playwriting, and honors from Lambda Literary, the Publishing Triangle, NLG, JA, the American Library Association, and others. Her writing has appeared in the New Yorker, New York, Harper's Magazine, The Atlantic, The Nation, The New Republic, The New York Times, and The Guardian. Schulman holds an endowed chair in creative writing at Northwestern University and is on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace. So welcome to you both, and welcome to everybody who is here with us in this room and everybody who is with us online. We're so delighted to have you. We will have an opportunity to ask questions. The only thing I ask is that you raise your hand and let me bring you a microphone so that we can get your voice into the room for everyone. And if you're online, just type your question into the chat and we will vocalize it into this space. But please, everyone, put your hands together to welcome Sarah Schulman.
Okay, now is this working? Is this working? Thank you, Professor. Thank you, everybody. You know, in an earlier incarnation of this store, we started the Lesbian Avenger chapter of Atlanta like 36 years ago. So here we are. Hey, folks, there's a seat here. And if you want to sit on the floor, you can certainly sit in the front. Hi. Hello. Can you sit on the floor? Are you okay with that? Okay. Thanks. Okay. I'm going to read a little bit from this book. The Zone of Interest. I'm reading my Twitter, now X. I have 2 frantic feeds, neither of which knows the other exists. One is a devoted multitude of posts about the Tony Awards of 2024, unfolding that evening on television. Counterposed on my X that same evening is an international, multi-language, devastated, angry, desperate feed about the ongoing shattering of lives and futures in Gaza. These 2 conversations never seem to meet. I keep checking the posts about the Tony Awards to see if anyone says anything concerning the world or even our own nation. Finally, one winner calls for more arts funding. He says it's a requirement for civilized society. But a few months before the Oscars, it was a little different. The winner in the category of International Feature Film was The Zone of Interest, a co-production of the UK, Poland, and the United States. On the surface, The Zone of Interest is a Holocaust film about the Nazi commandant of Auschwitz whose family home, where he raised his children, shared a wall with the extermination camp he oversaw. The film never enters the camp. We see the smoke, we hear some sounds, but the point of view lies strictly with the Nazi family on this side of the wall. On this side of the wall, they have a swimming pool, while the invisible people on the other side have no food. The people on this side have luxury items. They give their children expensive presents. We never see the others, but we know they are being exterminated. Had the zone of interest functioned only on the level of this story I just described, it would have been an exquisitely executed retread of information we already know and are in some ways comfortably familiar with. But there is a unique experience to watching this film, that wall. After a while, as we watch, the past and present resonate, and then they begin to merge. But all the transformation takes place inside us, the viewers. The film's narrative stays in the past, but its meaning engulfs the present. That wall becomes the Israeli separation wall, where one side fills swimming pools, while on the other side Palestinians have no water. One side controls the other, while tucking their children into sleep in comfortable beds, and now that side is eliminating the other. The winner, director and writer Jonathan Glazer, then takes this moment of personal recognition and, almost trembling, not with happiness but with fear, he makes the following statement, quote, "All our choices were made to reflect and confront us in the present, not to say, look what they did then. Rather, look what we do now." Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It's shaped all of our past and present. Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Whether the victims of October the 7th in Israel or the ongoing attack on Gaza, all the victims of this dehumanization, how do we resist? End quote. Now, in many ways, this is a modest statement. That the intense violence, murder, and cultural destruction that Jews experienced historically by Nazis produced the violence against Palestinians that Israel is committing today is a well-known interpretation of the cycle of violence, a frequent explanation of the current cataclysm that equates Israeli and Palestinian suffering. And Glazer's work had already made this statement. He wasn't coming to the stage like many predecessors, winning for repetitive, familiar content, awkwardly squeezing in some unrelated political comment after thanking their agents. But I wondered if the people in the film industry who voted for him fully realized what the film was actually about, how intentional the dual meaning. Of course, he had to be punished for being one of the few public figures to speak the simple truth on American television, the truth that the entertainment and media industries has so studiously avoided that it sounded strange. That was March 10th, 2024. By March 18th, over 1,000 Jewish creatives and professionals signed their names to a public denunciation of Jonathan Glazer's words that had reiterated the meaning of his film. They wrote, quote, "The use of words like occupation to describe an indigenous Jewish people defending a homeland that dates back thousands of years and has been recognized as a state by the United Nations distorts history," end quote. Now, the United Nations does recognize the state of Israel, and it also recognizes that Israel has occupied Palestinian land. To quote from the United Nations official document, The Question of Palestine, quote, in the 1967 war, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and East Jerusalem, end quote. I was surprised that so many powerful and intelligent people's first objection was to Glazer stating the globally recognized and simple fact that Israel has militarily occupied land where Palestinians currently live or formerly lived. It is irrefutable that Palestinians' lives are controlled by Israel and they are occupied. I would have expected the signers to justify that occupation, not to claim that it doesn't exist. Equally peculiar is that so many worldly and in many cases secular people would use biblical justification for Jewish dominance of land that is inhabited by more than one people. Yes, it is certainly true that there have been Arab Jews coexisting with Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, and Druze throughout different empires and collective histories. Jews were an integrated part of the Arab world before the current created false binary of Jews versus Arabs. 40 to 50% of Jews in Israel are of Arab origin, from a range of nations including Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, Morocco, and Palestine. And so Arab Jews were among the range of peoples indigenous to the region, but for over 1,000 people who have significant roles in the corporate creation of American arts and entertainment to think that Jews are the only indigenous people to that area, or that European Jews are indigenous to the Middle East, it simply doesn't make any sense. The letter further stated that these 1,000 Jews believe that Glazer's statement, quote, gives credence to the modern blood libel that fuels a growing anti-Jewish hatred around the world, end quote. Blood libel is an anti-Semitic claim originating in the Middle Ages, falsely accusing Jews of vampirishly using the blood of Christian children to make Passover matzah. It is pretty crazy that so many people were willing to sign a letter interpreting Glazer's call for an end to using the Holocaust to justify murdering Palestinians as the same as him saying that Jews kill Christian children to make matzah. Medieval Jews, who were a vulnerable and often blamed minority, did not kill Christian children, but the 1,000 signers are betraying an unconscious association because Israelis with American money are killing children daily and in large numbers. I'm sitting in LA across the table from an old friend. She's smart, kind, hardworking, from a modest Jewish background. She has earned millions of dollars working in corporate television. She is so upset about Israel's violence in Gaza. She is devastated. She looks around to make sure no one in the restaurant can hear her criticize Israel. She won't sign anything. She won't say anything in public. It could hurt her professionally. And this is a common response I've heard from many people who I consider to be friends. They are afraid to say what they believe to be true because of the 1,000 people who signed their names and the thousands more who didn't sign but feel the same way. My feeling is that, yes, doors will close, but those people don't control everything. Other doors will open. In some strange way, my silent friends believe the myth that Zionist Jews control all the entertainment industries. I, on the other hand, do not believe that. Let's face it, if my friends were correct, you would not be reading this book right now, and it would not have been published by Penguin Random House. It takes until April 5th to gather 500 signatures in a new document carefully titled Jewish Creatives Supporting Jonathan Glazer's Oscars Speech. Quote, we honor the Holocaust by saying, never again for anyone. We should be able to name Israel's apartheid and occupation without being accused of rewriting history. And the signers include Deborah Winger, Todd Haynes, Chloe Feynman, Elliot Gould, Joaquin Phoenix, Mike Lee, Wallace Shawn, Emma Seligman, Nan Golden, Nicole Eisenman, Miranda July, Naomi Klein, Jonathan Latham, Jacqueline Rose, Amy Silliman, and me. Okay, thank you. Hello, doctor.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay.
Thank you. First of all, let me say thank you, Charis, for inviting and hosting this event. And thank you so much, Sarah, for writing this book. I am so honored to be an interlocutor with you this evening. There were so many things I loved about your book. It's timely, it's urgent, and most importantly, it's a book that's written for everyone. I read your book and I come to your work as a brown lesbian feminist of Pakistani descent, of Muslim descent, who writes of the psychic residue of violence and what it means for women of color to develop modalities of care and solidarity in the midst of a whole world that rest on structures of decay and death. And listening to you read, especially this particular section, I'm thinking about how we are now in the 600th day of this ongoing genocide. And we know to kind of really think about the material conditions of which we are in right now, that Palestinians are running out of soil to bury their dead. We are witnessing every day that Palestinian children are being dismembered, something that you talk about in your book, dismembered into flesh. I think about a particular video that was screened of a father holding two bags in his hands, screaming that in these two garbage bags, actually, saying, "In these bags are my children," and they were basically amputated limbs. Um, we are witnessing the systematic starvation being imposed in Gaza, which we might call engineered starvation. We're witnessing a mockery of that violence that we can screen on our screens, that we can stream on our screens by Israeli soldiers. So violence that's happening, but violence that's also being mocked every day by soldiers. We read about pro-rapist Israeli soldiers, which has broader geopolitical effects across borders. For example, in Germany, uh, refugees are referred to by the German right as refugees. Wow. Muslim refugees specifically are referred to as refugees. My dear friend in Palestine, a very well-known scholar, Nadira Shelhabub Kevorkian, who was actually exiled from Hebrew University, who's a law professor for speaking up against the genocide last April, wrote to me about a woman just most recently who carried a pregnancy to full term only to give birth to a baby girl born with a skull empty of a brain. And doctors are now forecasting that almost 200,000 babies will be born with genetic disorders. So, in these conditions, or these rather are the conditions in which Palestinian people are continuing to live, act, mobilize, and open spaces of hope, love, and communal power. And meanwhile, in the US, every day we are seeing people of color at risk of surveillance, arrest, deportation, assault, and disappearance. And so we're in this moment, Sarah, where we have to move very quickly from shock to analysis to action. And as I was reading your book, you write that you came to Palestinian solidarity in 2007, and it was a transformative moment for you. And I think it would be very important for the audience here today and for your readers to, I would love to, actually, this is one of my favorite parts, for you to speak to your intimate journey to Palestinian solidarity, which I think is a very important part of the story. And it's intertwining with your other identifications as lesbian, as Jewish, as secular, as feminist, and as an anti-racist writer of social justice.
Okay, I'll tell you the story. Well, I was born in 1958, which is 13 years after the end of the Holocaust, which is not that much. I come from a Holocaust family. I was raised with certain ideas about Jewish victimization. 1945, Jews were among the most oppressed people in the world, and 3 years later, we had a nation state where we dominated over another people. It's a very fast transition. And my parents, I think, believed that Arab-Israeli war was an extension of the European oppression of Jews. So I waited very long before I really tried to confront the reality of Israel and Palestine. I mean, I'm embarrassed and ashamed that it took me that long. But what happened was I wrote a book about homophobia in the family, and I was invited to Tel Aviv University in 2009, I think it was, to give a talk that topic, and I had had a very homophobic Jewish family, and I wanted to talk about it. But a colleague of mine, a Turkish Jewish woman, said, "You can't go. There's a boycott." And I said, "What boycott?" So international boycott was called by Palestinian civil society in 2005. And this was 2009. It hadn't reached me. So my colleague said, "Well, you should find out about it." So I emailed Judith Butler.
Of all people.
Who got back to me in 3 hours. Read this, read this, read this, read this. I read it all and I realized I can't go. There's a boycott. So I wrote a public letter explaining that I couldn't go because Palestinians were asking internationals, and still are, to boycott Israeli state-sponsored institutions, which includes universities. Mm-hmm. So then I got an email from someone named Omar Barghouti in Ramallah, West Bank, who's one of the leaders of the BDS movement. He had been a graduate student at Columbia during the anti-apartheid movement, and he based the BDS movement on that that was a movement that successfully got Columbia to divest from South Africa. And he was like, "Oh, Professor Schulman, thank you for taking this principled stance." And I thought, I don't know what he thinks about queer people, because I remembered the American left in Cuba. People had gone out for Cuba not knowing how oppressed gay people were. So I was a little concerned because I was in territory that I really didn't understand or know anything about. So through all these different people, I was put in touch with 2 Palestinian queer organizations, Al-Qaus, which was men and women and trans people based in the West Bank, and Aswat, which was queer women, and that was based in Israel. And they said to me, "Come on your own dime, speak at anti-occupation venues, and then come to the West Bank and meet us and meet Omar and all this stuff." So I went to Israel. I spoke at an anarchist vegan cafe. A bunch of anarchists drove me to this town, this village called Be'eline. This is when they were building the separation wall. And the people in the village, they would have this demonstration every Friday against the wall. So I go to the demonstration, we're marching around, and then the Israeli soldiers come. And I look at them, and I look exactly like them. Because if my grandparents hadn't gotten a visa, I would have been them, right? And I'm looking at them, and suddenly they shoot tear gas at us. We weren't doing anything. And the Palestinians take cut onions out of their pockets and put them over their noses to defend against the tear gas. And all of a sudden, I had this moment like in The Exorcist, where my head just went around like that, and my feeling of who is we completely changed. I was no longer we with these soldiers, and I became we with the protesters. So I went to Ramallah, I met with Omar, I met with the queer people. I made my very first mistake, and one of the things in my book is solidarity is about making mistakes constantly. Mm-hmm. And my first mistake was, "Omar, what can I do?" Because I wanted him to tell me. Mm-hmm. And he said, "You're creative, you'll think of something." And the queer people said, "Bring us to America because the U.S. gay movement needs to meet us." So I spent a year raising money. I raised $40,000, including from George Soros. And I brought over 3 leaders of the queer Palestinian movement. I organized a U.S. tour of 7 cities. They met with like the Black gay community of Chicago, the Arab gay community of the Bay Area, the public university, the private university, and all this stuff. And this is when Facebook was really just happening, and people were posting about them, and it was growing, and we had so many huge audiences. I mean, it was unbelievable how many people met them and heard about them and read about them. And then we were contacted by Rashid Khalidi at the Columbia University former Palestinian Studies program, which has now been dismantled. And we met with him, and he said that all these straight Palestinians were asking him, "Who are these people?" Because they were finding out about it through social media. And at that meeting, he told me, "Well, you should do an LGBT delegation to Palestine." So I was like, okay. So that was the next thing I did, was the first LGBT delegation to Palestine, and et cetera. And it's become a way of life, since then. So that's basically the story.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I that was 2013, I want to say, also the CUNY conference, right?
Yes, we did a CUNY conference on homo nationalism and pinkwashing.
Yeah. And just to kind of jump off of that, I was hoping, because you touch on this, that kind of interesting moment where, you move from the thinking about that us, them dyad, if you can maybe speak a little bit also, coming from a homophobic Jewish family that was also still, and you talk about this in the book, that's, deeply rooted in anti-racist, struggles.
Well, my mother was
Yes.
slightly
and you grew
pink.
up going to protest as
Yes.
well, right?
Yes.
But there was this deep homophobia in your family. So I'm hoping you can speak perhaps to this haunting tension between loyalty and solidarity, because I think this is a detail that many folks don't parse when we think about solidarity. Is solidarity the same thing as loyalty? And actually it's not.
Okay, well, maybe I should start with what is solidarity and then go to that. So the point of this book is to make solidarity more doable.
Mm-hmm.
And my idea is the way to make it more doable is to take away any illusion of heroism, perfectionism, or pure motive.
Mm-hmm.
Because first of all, those things are impossible. They do not exist, and they are obstacles to people moving forward. Actually, solidarity is a process of making mistakes constantly and having to constantly, reconceptualize yourself. And that's why an environment of micro-critique does not facilitate solidarity. And where I learned that from is ACT UP. So, ACT UP is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. It's the direct action wing of the AIDS activist movement. I wrote a 600-page book about it, if you're curious. But, ACT UP was one of the most successful social movements of our time. And one of the reasons is because they did not have a consensus-based model. People were allowed to disagree. So they had a one-line statement of unity, direct action to end the AIDS crisis. And if you had an idea that was that, basically you could do it. So let's say Doug had an idea and I thought it was terrible. I would yell and scream at you because New York, right? But in the end, I wouldn't try to stop you from doing it. I just wouldn't do it if I thought it was a bad idea. And then I would get my 5 people to do my idea. And this radical democracy means the acceptance of difference with a bottom line. This structure allowed a simultaneity of response where so many people did so many different kinds of actions at the same time and followed so many different strategies and all of this. But that's what created the paradigm shift. Because movements that try to make everybody have one analysis or one strategy have all failed, and there is no exception to that. Basically because people are different. And I know that's like a horrible thing to try to accept. I've personally been in therapy for 40 years, trying to accept that people are different. But it's just true. People can only be where they're at. So real leadership is about helping people be effective where they're at. So that's why purity politics is the obstruction to solidarity. And in the moment that we're in right now, where every community is under attack, right? So how are we all supposed to work together if we want each other to be exactly like us? And if we're going to do micro-critique and we're depending on purity? Because if you're from Salvador, you don't want to get kidnapped. And if you're a Harvard professor, you don't want your students to be arrested. And there might be a tiny bit of overlap between those two groups, but not a lot. And they don't have that much in common experientially, but they have the same forces that oppose them. So we've got to get into this thing about making mistakes is okay, changing is okay, saying things that somebody else doesn't like is all right, because it's the only way to go forward. And the other side of that, I'm sorry, I know it's like I'm going off a little bit, but there is a cost to solidarity. You can lose your access, you can lose your status, you can lose relationships. You can also lose your job, as we're finding increasingly. People are losing their jobs for their social media posts. Remember when people used to complain that social media was performative? Now you can lose your job and get arrested for your social media. But if we don't do anything, all those things are going to happen anyway.
Well, and we know it's already happened. We can use the example of Steven Saleta, who lost his job back in 2014, 2013.
Right.
So there's already a history here of that happening. It's amplified. The stakes are higher now. That felt like a one-off when it happened.
Well, it felt
that
like
was also,
he was Palestinian and he was an indigenous scholar, and it felt like that was the magic combination.
But he was a U.S. citizen,
right?
So
right.
So it felt like it couldn't happen, yet it did. So there's already a kind of genealogy of precarity for Palestinian scholars.
That's true, and simultaneously, there's a history of the Palestine Solidarity Movement, which is these organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine or Jewish Voice for Peace. They're 30 years old, these groups. For 3 decades, people have been building organizations, writing books, coming up with a strategy, boycott, divestment, sanctions, creating concepts, pinkwashing, right? So building the infrastructure of a movement so that when students, who in my view are the most ethical, moral sector of our culture right now, they are the people who are speaking out against U.S. funding to Israel and the mass murders in Gaza more than any other milieu. They have a movement that's been built. So even though we're in the middle of a fascist cataclysm right now that we can't fix like that, that's a supremacy fantasy that you can just come in and fix something or there's a way out. But we know from history we can build more infrastructure of political movements, of relationships, of community structure, and that's all we can do.
So I was thinking on that note, in terms of your book title, there's 2 prongs, the fantasy and the necessity. So let's linger, I think, with the fantasy, because we know fantasy is actually a very important aspect of solidarity. Of this, your fantasy has undergirded a lot of social justice movements in the 60s, the Black Panther movement. I think in the context of South Asia, the India-Pakistan struggle against British colonialism, this fantasy of us, who's this us, that binds the kind of colonizer against the colonized against the colonizer. So it is an important part of kind of holding social justice movements together, but there are limits to it. And I think one of the aspects of your book that I found really interesting is that you outline these varying, you outline the kind of aspects, what I call these psychic distortions, what I saw as these psychic distortions or fantastical elements of solidarity. So I'm going to lay some of these out that I was able to excavate. So for example, the afflicted will love us.
Right. That's a big one.
Yeah. Solidarity efforts are not laborious, or at least not too laborious. We give up nothing, or nothing is lost. Solidarity is clean versus sticky. Material conditions of inequality are manageable. And, so again, what I observed about some of these is that, they are undergirded by a set of psychic distortions that require us to believe in this kind of innocence of us. And so what I'm hoping, Sarah, is perhaps you can talk about how you came to recognize these fantasies and the movement work that you've done, their usefulness, their limits, how you've perhaps released yourself of them, negotiated them over the years as you take risk. And what all of this means right now for you as a writer, as a teacher, particularly in and out of a university that we see crumbling around us, or at least revealing itself for the farce that we are now seeing, particularly those of us who are in the university.
Well, you're raising so many different things. So let me just start with
whichever of those you want to touch on.
Let me start with the fantasy necessity dichotomy. So throughout the book, I give examples of these really interesting, weird, iconoclastic individuals and fascinating but completely under-historicized political movements that tried very creative approaches. Because I think it's interesting to see what people have done that have moved things a little. So one of the examples is in Spain, Franco was the fascist dictator of Spain. And when he died in the late 70s, abortion was illegal in Spain. And it was illegal for Spanish women to leave the country to get an abortion, which is something a lot of US states are trying to impose right now, right? France, on the other hand, was having the big feminist festival of the whole, they were going crazy. So these women in the south of France decided to help Spanish women cross the border to get abortions. And they gave each woman a task to do when they got home, like field a phone call from someone who was interested in coming, or bring back a box of diaphragms or whatever, and no one would ever do it. And the French women finally figured out that these Spanish women had spent their whole lives under fascism. They were completely acculturated to the fascist mentality. So then they had to ask themselves, was this project a fail? And they decided no, because these women got these abortions that they needed. That was the necessity. And the fantasy was us thinking that that would make them be just like us. And that's what kind of was the blueprint for that dichotomy for me. As I told you, asking Omar what I should do, that was a mistake that I've made for many, many years. I once said to Haneen Mikey, who was the director of Al-Qaus, this Palestinian queer group, what do you want me to do? What should I do? And she was like, I can't think up your strategy for you. This idea of not taking responsibility to think of a way forward, that's something that I've definitely grappled with. Mm-hmm. I mean, I make mistakes every day, and I'm not going to tell you all the mistakes I made today, but it's just that's the way it is, because it's a relationship of inequality inherently. The old idea of solidarity was horizontal. You have the workers in the shop and you have the boss, and the workers unite and they can win better working conditions from the boss. But now the boss is like a globalized conglomerate. And sometimes horizontal solidarity is not enough. And you have to bring in other groups like bystanders, people who know there's an injustice, but they're not implicated. Or conflicted perpetrators like myself and people in Jewish Voice for Peace. All this killing is being done in our name, and we are required ethically and morally to stand up against it. But that creates relationships of inequality. And knowing how to handle that is an ongoing life evolving experience.
Yeah, I appreciate this emphasis on solidarity as plural, moving it away from the singular to solidarity, to solidarities as plural. And what you say in your book as kind of releasing solidarity from its grandeur or its saintliness, to quote you, and kind of opening it up as an offering, as a daily habitus, and that was one of the things I really appreciated. And I think you do this thing in your book where you offer these moments where, whether it's where varying friends or colleagues have that you thought were in solidarity with you, who actually mid-practice, if you will, or mid-solidarity abandoned you.
Well, because I've also had times when I needed solidarity. I mean, I had a completely homophobic family. Mm-hmm. I've been doing openly lesbian work in very hostile culture industries my whole life. Mm-hmm. And I've asked for solidarity repeatedly. So I do have some experience of it as a dynamic. Mm-hmm. That's true.
And I think this is one of the things I'd like to talk about is, when we're doing solidarity work, whether in the context of, doing lesbian solidarity work, doing queer work, and particularly right now in the context of Palestine, I feel like I'm constantly in a state of grief, which is why I open with the kind of material conditions that I offered our audience this evening is, this rage that we feel. I think about Audre Lorde uses of rage.
She was my professor.
I didn't know that.
She was my college professor.
You must share. You must share. You must say more. Actually, I'll stop talking now, please.
Okay. So I went to Hunter College, City University of New York in 1982, and there was this class called U.S. Literature After World War II. So Audre comes in the first day. She had one breast at that time. So she was wearing all this jewelry down the other side of her.
Just Amazonian courage.
Yes. And she announces, we're changing the name of this class to The Poet as Outsider.
Excellent.
And the 3 assigned texts were understanding the new Black poetry, lesbian poetry, and Native American poetry. So she made everyone carry this book called Lesbian Poetry on the subway to get to school, etc. I could go on, but life-changing experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. I completely lost my train of thought.
Alexis Pauline Gomes has this new biography of Audrey,
Yeah.
and she has a whole chapter interviewing her students, and I'm one of them, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. So yes, I'm thinking about that's just amazing. But I was thinking about what goodness, yes, mourning and grief and rage. In this, what you share, these kind of moments that you share in your book, where I think you use the example of the art forum. I think I'll turn to that in the chapter you read from in Zone of Interest, and it continues into the picket line for the art forum, the picket line for the protest with Pen America, but where you have colleagues, friends that you're in solidarity with, who some of them who cross the picket line, and you're surprised. You're in this moment. You're in this conversation with a friend who says, "Well, I'm publishing with Art Forum," and so how I'm thinking, when you're in solidarity with someone and they abandon you, mid-act. So, in the context of Palestine, in the context of the kind of work we do, can you talk about what you're mourning in this moment? How do we pick up the pieces when we're in such a deep grief and such deep rage? Because there's a lot of hope in your book, but
yes.
I also and maybe this is the lesbian melancholy in me is I want to know, Sarah, like what are you mourning? What are you raging about?
Strange. I was raised in a Holocaust family, right? I knew about the Holocaust since the day I was born. Seriously, my parents did not hide anything. And then I lived through the AIDS crisis. And I had that kind of character. I was attracted to act up, and I had been an AIDS reporter before that. And it's one of those, it lasted for 15 years. And you're just desperate and you think it's never going to end. And you watch people die for no reason. They die because of government neglect. But it ended. And I have been privileged enough to have been in a movement that succeeded. So I know that they can. And that's what you're seeing as optimism. It's really just practical. I really understand these fascist entities do not last forever. But we can't just sit around. So, and also when you take risks, I'm privileged because of a lot of reasons. And in this fight, because I'm Jewish, right? But in 2016, I was accused of anti-Semitism by the City University of New York because I was a faculty advisor to Students for Justice in Palestine. And the lawyer they hired to prosecute me was the guy who defended Dominique Strauss-Kahn when he raped an African woman in a hotel room. You remember that? And it was insane. I mean, I have 2 Jewish names. Why am I being accused of anti-Semitism? And ultimately, because I'm Jewish, I was acquitted after 6 months. Now, today it's different. People like Maura Finkelstein have just been fired from a tenure track position. But so, I know that it's like there are dangers, and I do have protections that other people have. But I also feel like internal coherence is so important. And the only thing we can control is our integrity. It's the only thing we have control over. And if you do nothing, terrible things can all happen to you anyway. I don't know how else to address that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to ask you one more question and then we open it up because you mentioned privilege.
Yes.
And I think, so my question is, as an anti-Zionist Jew who has tremendous public visibility in both the academic and artistic world, and indeed it is because you're an anti-Zionist, it's indeed your anti-Zionist Jewish position is the reason people are listening to you and reading your books. And knowing this particular disjuncture that we are at, where people are looking for Jewish voices to authorize them in the context of Palestine. As we close our conversation, one question that weighs very heavily on me after reading your book on solidarity: what do you think is the most effective way to give Palestinian voices space and visibility as interlocutors with you, given the kind of public platform you have in the context of your book, or in other contexts in which you have public platform, or just more broadly as a general practice?
Well, I'm on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace, which is an anti-Zionist pro-BDS organization that now has 35,000 members. And we have what we call Palestinian leadership. So we just had our national conference in Baltimore. It was 2,000 people. And almost every major speaker was Palestinian leader. Rashida Tlaib was there. Nora Erekat was there. I mean, Sandra Tamari was there. Omar Barghouti spoke by video. And that was true 5 years ago when we had our last conference. So, and it was interesting because in the room, the big backdrop said, Palestinian liberation, Judaism beyond Zionism, justice for all. So that's how that is structured. Obviously, I'm not as powerful as I am as an American Jew. I'm unable to penetrate things like MSNBC and the New York Times, which are, the New York Times is a rag when it comes to Israel-Palestine. Yeah. And MSNBC, I don't think Rachel Maddow has ever said the word Gaza. I mean, a friend of mine tried to Google her name and the word Gaza, and I think nothing came up. That's also true for Kimberly Crenshaw, by the way. There are key people who are just not dipping their toe in that. Mm-hmm. So
it's strange.
Yeah, I could name some more of them, but I'm not going to.
You and me,
yeah. Like a person who's very famous for the concept of the subaltern, if anyone here is an academic.
Oh, I can say, yes. I have tales.
So it's a relative position of power, but we don't have enough power to transform the discourse. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in terms of doing things like, I'm not submitting my book for the PEN Awards. I would never speak at the 92nd Street Y because they canceled Viet Nguyen, Vietnamese Pulitzer Prize winner, because he had signed a letter. I'm not going to speak there. It's like, I don't care. And maybe it's because I write lesbian books and I spent half my life in the underground, but it's like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Why? Mm-hmm. I don't understand my peers who want a PEN Award. Who wants that? Mm-hmm. No, seriously. And you're talking about my friend who said that he was publishing an art form because it was important. Mm-hmm. It's not important. It's important to not publish. So this is the issue of status and access. Mm-hmm. But maybe because I come from the old school queer world where everything took place underground anyway, I already understand what how strong and powerful that is. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we take questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Also, you can disagree. They don't just have to be questions. Yeah.
I won't be disagreeing. My name's Alex. I'm also from a Holocaust family. My grandparents were survivors, and I'm named after a gay man that died of AIDS. So thank you for your work on that issue as well. I'm now going to ask you a question that has nothing to do with your talk. I apologize. So when I have these conversations in Jewish spaces, what I am met with is their response is always about anti-Semitism, about the fear of anti-Semitism, and specifically the weaponization of fear. And I then try to have personal conversations where I say, I have never experienced anti-Semitism. I feel deeply safe in America, but I'm now looking to use your expertise to talk, like, what is a response to that? And I also think it carries to the last question about privilege, which is I struggle in Jewish spaces because, and as a Jewish American, where American Jews both want to win the oppression Olympics, But also they want to have a safe nation space and have a lot of protections and safety and, a dominant voice in mainstream publications like the New York Times. And so how can both things be true? And how do you convince people that maybe there is some anti-Semitism and maybe there are some reasons to feel fear, but their oppression doesn't win here? So.
Well, first of all, I just want to make the statement that no one is being persecuted on any American campus because they are Jewish. That is not happening. What is happening is that people who support the Israeli state or support Israeli policy are being confronted by an opposition that wants them to reimagine themselves. And I wrote a whole book about this called Conflict is Not Abuse. When people who are in a power position are asked to question themselves, they think that they are being victimized. And students especially are being fed this by organizations like Hillel, which used to be for all Jewish students, but now it's a Zionist organization. So they're walking around using this language of feeling. They're feeling unsafe, and they equate that with mass murder and starvation that is taking place in Gaza. It's completely false. Now, what a lot of this comes from is the fake argument that criticizing Israel is anti-Semitism. This is completely false. But this was invented by the Zionist movement as a strategy. And what happened was, which always happens when you use lies to propel your politics, is it got seized by Christian nationalists. Mm-hmm. So these people who are holding these hearings on television, these are like McCarthyite hearings where they drag in, university presidents and humiliate. They're not Jewish. They're Virginia Fox, who's a born-again Christian from North Carolina, Elise Stefanik, who's Catholic and went to Harvard, by the way. There's an organization called Christians United for Israel that has 10 million paid members. There's not even 10 million Jews in the United States. Mm-hmm. So this is how this happened. But what's interesting, what you're saying, what's happening now is that Jewish organizations who facilitated this are now speaking out against it because they think it's being weaponized, and their criticism again positions them as the victims. We are not the victims. There is attitudinal anti-Semitism. There are people who don't like Jews, who have all kinds of ideas about Jews, but Jews are not being killed by the police. That is not happening. And so it's a falsity, and it's a diversion from taking responsibility for what's going on in Palestine. That's my view. Okay. Only because that was squeak.
Hi, thank you for being here. I look up to you very, very much, so I appreciate all of your work. But I have a question, and I don't know if I'm going to get this out right, but I was born and raised in fundamentalist Christianity. I'm transgender. I identified as a lesbian before then. I've had lots of different experiences of being very much sort of exiled from community and family and trying to be an activist. And what I have found is, and I think it speaks a little bit to the grief that was talked about, is sort of just the overwhelm of the grief. The more issues I care about, the more solidarity I try to have with communities. And I'm curious what you think about the running theme through, to me it seems, the running theme, no matter what we're talking about, no matter what community, no matter what oppression we're talking about, is this dehumanization component to things, right? And I'm curious if you sometimes worry or fear that us having so many different identities and communities, not that there's a problem with that, but that we get very distracted from the core theme of we're all experiencing this dehumanizing experience. I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are on that, because I don't mean it from a place of sort of whitewashing or pinkwashing or any of that, away the identity, but there's only so much any one person can fight for at any one time. And I wonder if the mission becomes fighting against dehumanization, if that might enable people more.
I understand what you're saying. I do look at it differently. I like us to have demands that are winnable. I'm very concrete in this regard, and I saw that this is what worked for ACT UP. Asking for demands like socialist revolution right now is not something you can win right now. And it's interesting because Dr. King had the same structure. And we become the expert on our issues. We design the solution to avoid being infantilized and asking the powers that be to solve everything because they don't want to solve it, they're not gonna, and they don't know how. So we come up with a solution that's reasonable, winnable, and doable. And each of us has that expertise in a different realm. So that's why I was saying that leadership is about helping people being effective where they're at. So that whatever realm we're fighting in, we're being effective. You know, one of the problems with the left is we do something and it doesn't work, and then we do it again. You know, and it's like, if it doesn't work, don't do it again. You know? So the thing that does work is making a demand like divestment, something that is winnable, and building your actions to push for your demand. That's what a campaign is, so that it's all dynamic. We fail when we do actions that are not linked to a demand. I'm sure you've all had the experience of like being called out to some kind of demonstration, and it's raining, of course, and you're walking around in the rain, and then you're standing in the rain listening to speeches telling you things you already know. This does not work, you know? So I think that's my take on what you're saying is for wherever you are and whoever you are and whatever issues you're addressing is to try to do them in a way that can be effective. And one of the things that I learned about, I was in ACT UP and then I learned in studying ACT UP, is that they never had any theory whatsoever. Everything was action because, you know, people had AIDS and they were dying and they needed this and they needed that, and you had to get it. So one of the leaders of ACT UP, Maxine Wolf, observed that if you go action first, your theory will emerge because you have to make decisions about how you're going to do your action. And in that way, you cohere your values. If you go theory first, you get polarized over nothing. You know, so anyway.
We have an online question. I believe this is from Professor Tiffany King. Who was your imagined audience or we for the book? Has the intended we changed in your mind since the book's release? I ask because there are some tensions, loyalties, perhaps lingering attachments to Zionism that many anti-imperialist Black and Indigenous people do not have to work through to arrive at a commitment to solidarity for Palestinians. At the forefront of my mind is campus organizing. I'm watching students work through the painful fracturing of their coalitions. There are different genealogies of histories, practices of solidarity that are sometimes in tension. Thank you for your thoughts.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot of Palestinian books. There's a lot of books by people of color, right? I think my most effective audience are confused Jews, Zionists, and adjacent. I mean, I think that that's where the book is most effective. Of course, everybody writes books that they want to be for everybody, and I'm thinking about a lot of different kinds of people, but I am limited by my perspective. You know, so I do understand what the professor is saying there.
Thanks for your talk. I was curious if you had thoughts on how to balance solidarity with strategy. Like, one thing that I often notice on the left is like kind of the sense to run to whatever the burning fire of the day is, you know, like the issues today are not the issues that like the left was organizing around in 2018 or even 2020. And there's a sense that like, it's almost as if we are following like what's trending, like what's on social media or, you know, what's in the news cycle and not working towards any kind of like long-term goals. Like, obviously, I mean, well, for me, like, you know, there's no discourse on BLM today, whereas like 5 years ago, it may have been the main thing. And whatever it is today, it's a real question of, is that going to be relevant 6 months from now? So like, how do you think about being in solidarity with different movements while also like strategically maybe focusing on something to achieve a long-term outcome?
Well, I believe in all strategies. I don't think one strategy is better than another. But I just think that you have to go by your context. You know, Palestine has this concept called strategic radicalism, that for every context, you need a different kind of strategy in order to make a demand that's winnable. right? So I don't, like, I'm so focused on being effective. And one of the problems is we don't really know what's going on in the country. Like, I don't know, are the anti-police violence people in Milwaukee doing something really interesting? I have no idea what they're doing. I don't even know. I mean, I know about Cop City, but I don't know much about what's going on in Atlanta. It's like there's no one place to find out what's happening in different cities, whose strategies are what, who's responding. I've been on this book tour, which has been great because I've been in 17 places and I've heard a lot about what's going on locally. But it's just, I think if you focus on what's most important to you and what you know the best, and you make a demand that you think is winnable on your most local target, and find 5 people to work on it with you, you have a chance of being more effective. I mean, that's my view.
So you are also, in addition to being an organizer and a writer, you're a professor. And so
I am.
if you could encourage, and obviously I'm a bookseller, so if you could encourage everyone in this room to read 1 or 2 books that you want to suggest, like that helped shift you in some fundamental way, do you want to shout those out?
Well, Minor Detail by Adoniya Shipley is an incredible novel, and it works formally. It's a novel that shows you how, for Palestinians, the past and the present exist at the same time. It's remarkable. So that would be my number 1 favorite.
Also, you mentioned that in the book as well.
Yeah, I listed a bunch of books. So the most interesting books by Palestinians in the year that I was writing that are all by small presses. That was published by Fitzcarraldo. Also, Raja Sheheda, if that's how you say his name. We Could Have Been Friends, My Father and I. It's a remarkable memoir about his relationship with his father and a fight that they had 40 years ago. But in the background, the Israelis are building the road system that's going to be used to build the settlements. And this thing is happening as these 2 people are focused on their personal relationship. It's a remarkable book. I will say I've been a judge on 2 major book prizes in the last 5 years, the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize. And in both cases, I did surveys of the field. This is in nonfiction. In one case, we looked at 600 books, and in another case, we looked at 400 books. And let me tell you, they are not good. American publishing is stuck in repetition. It's all repetition. It's hard to find 10 books that are actually vital because we have this confusion between familiarity and quality. And, entertainment is telling people what they already know. And art, is expanding how people know. And in the United States, our 2 biggest exports are entertainment and weapons. And most of our entertainment are advertisements for weapons. And this is what corporate publishing is. It's very repetitive. It was kind of scary to see how bad American publishing is.
On that note,
sorry.
The good news is that Sarah Schulman has also written many novels. And so if you would like to read some art, in addition, I do think that creative nonfiction is artful. So I don't want to create that, binary, right. But there are many, we have a beautiful table of Sarah Schulman's books across the generations, really, across the decades. And we also have Moon's book up there, which is also an incredible work. And so we're going to pivot and encourage y'all to meet one another. One of the things that we love, Sarah mentioned, was, that the Lesbian Avengers chapter was built at a Charis event with Sarah Schulman in the 90s. Who knows what can be built tonight? I encourage you to find out. I encourage you to meet each other, but we're going to transition towards a book signing in just a minute. I'm going to bring you a table and you'll just stay there and bring you some pens. Okay. For all of our friends watching online, thank you so much for being with us tonight. You can click the teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy The Fantasy and Necessity of Solidarity from Charis right now. Really does help us when you buy books from us. The other thing I would be remiss if I don't say is that Charis Circle is our nonprofit programming arm. We are primarily individually donor sponsored. That means that we make our money in $10, $5, $20 increments. And that allows us to be free and to put on programs like this and not be told what to do. So when everybody lost their NEA grants, we were like, well, that sucks for you, but we don't get NEA grants because we are directly funded by people like you. So if you would like to support our work, you can make a donation at the cash register, or you can come see me, and it really does help us. So thank you. Thank you to Moon for your beautiful interviewing. Thank you once again to Sarah Schulman.
Okay.